I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On today's show, we'll talk about the Supreme Court ruling against the NCAA, recruiting commits in Gainesville, how the college football playoff expansion will impact Dan Mullen per David Wunderlich at Gator Country, and a Father's Day message to cap it off. But we'll first move over to Two Bits. For the first time since 1985, the Supreme Court has made a major ruling about the NCAA. They basically ruled in 1985. They ruled in favor of the University of Oklahoma that they changed the landscape of college football. Basically, opened it up to be on TV. None of this banning people off of TV thing anymore. That was a big deal. Change how we watch college football today. But this week, the Supreme Court of the United States unanimously affirmed a ruling on Monday that provides for an incremental increase in how college athletes can be compensated, and also opens the door for future legal challenges that could deal a much more significant blow to how the NCAA does business. Will, there's a lot of the talks about this coming up with with NIL coming into full force here in some states starting in July. How are you feeling about this ruling from the Supreme Court?
I mean, I think we sort of knew it was coming. I mean, the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit was interesting because the judge sort of put a cap on what players could receive, and that it was like $5,000 could be put into a trust. But on the actual issues, that judge even said that really there's antitrust problems with restricting these players. And the reality is that they're calling them student athletes for a reason. It's because then they don't have to call them employees, because for employees, you have to provide workers' comp, you have to provide insurance, you have to provide all the different things that you don't have to provide for somebody who's considered a student. And so the change is coming. And part of that is the 12-team playoff that's coming too. That's going to generate a boatload of money. And it's become a huge business. And when you're a huge business, you can't hide behind the guise of amateurism anymore. And Justice Kavanaugh, interestingly, wrote a supporting opinion today that if you go and actually read it, essentially says the NCAA has been operating outside of the rules of normal businesses for really no reason other than they claim some sort of special status. And he's like, they don't have special status. And that's what's going to end up killing the NCAA model. But the hope is like you said, back in 1985, they made some changes based on television deals that have turned college football into the behemoth that it is today. And so there's no reason that they can't turn college football into something that is a better product as they start to compensate the players and actually make sure that the players get a piece of this pie. But it is going to be interesting because in the NFL, you got 32 teams. You've got players who collectively bargain for very short careers. And in the NCAA, it's even shorter, right? It's a 4-year period. And so people in an ownership position are going to be at an advantage when it comes to negotiating. I'll be interested to see what happens once those sorts of things start taking place, when the players are able to negotiate, because some of them are going to take deals that look good short term that end up positioning players who are coming after them maybe not in the best position.
I'm going to read the quote from Kavanaugh because it was fairly direct. All right. He said the NCAA is not above the law. The NCAA couches its arguments for not paying student athletes in innocuous labels, but the labels cannot distinguish the but the labels cannot disguise the reality. The NCAA's business model would be flatly illegal in almost any other industry in America. I mean, Will, it is something where you look at this argument, and it has changed so much from even 20 years ago. I mean, the money now today with all these conference TV deals and everything, it's not even the same it was, 20, 30 years ago. The coaches you're seeing coaches make more than NFL coaches, or at least at that level. Like, I mean, most FBS schools are paying well above what you would have heard of, even 10 years ago. I mean, the money's a complete game changer with all these new television contracts and the expansion of the college football playoff. The other thing too that you got to factor in, that everyone wants to talk about just the money coming in college football, but there's something called Title IX that exists that you have to factor it in across all sports for the athletic departments. I think it's going to be difficult, but I think they're going to find a way at some point to work it in toward the student athletes, even if it's in a different way. Maybe you're not credited with all your stuff. Maybe you have to pay for your equipment too now or something. We're giving you the salary, but hey, you want that third pair of Nike shoes? That's going to come out of your paycheck or something like that. I don't know, but I think there's different ways you can get the model done.
Well, I mean, we've known that this is immoral for a really long time, right? I mean, people for years have been screaming about how these athletes should be compensated. The difference is, like you mentioned, the TV deals got big enough that it became interesting to lawyers to get involved, right? And so these suits have been brought against the
The
NCAA
sad reality.
because the lawyers, there's now enough money that the lawyers are going to be able to make some money. Yeah, I think, the reality is that if you break off a separate business from Title IX, from the university, then I'm not sure that it has to be compliant with Title IX. And one of the dangers to making this an official business, and I mean, again, Kavanaugh has basically said it's a business, you're just not calling it that. But one of the dangers to making that a legal reality is you've got to break off the business from the university. And when you do that, then all of a sudden Title IX doesn't get the funds that Title IX had normally gets from all the university. Because let's be honest, the football program makes a ton of money, but the universities at most places are not in the black. What they end up doing is taking that money and dispersing it amongst non-revenue sports to then support those sports. And that has been the model that most of the NCAA schools have used. Now, administrators and coaches and other people involved with the program get paid exorbitant sums of money. And you can sort of relate that maybe to like public schools where you've got a lot of administration that's built over the last few years. But, hey, at the end of the day, the courts have said that this is a model that's not sustainable, which means that I suspect the NCAA is going to change before they get sued again because they know they're going to lose. And so now they're going to be forced to change, and they'll come up with some creative ways. I mean, look, you can find a lot of different ways to count the beans. It'll be a question of counting them in a way that's legally allowed through both the university and Title IX. And that might mean splitting these things off as affiliated with the university, but not necessarily official university sports or something like that.
Well, let's look at what's coming around the corner with NIL legislation. Don't you feel like that's an issue, an effort to address this issue head on, where you're maybe not focused on now that I would think that the main difference between the Supreme Court rule is you're actually talking about the organization, about the colleges and the schools paying, whereas NIL, I feel like that just lets you bring it in from outside sources.
Yeah, so NIL, I think, was the NCAA's attempt, maybe. And some of they've been forced to do that, right? Like the states have passed laws making them do that. But that's sort of an attempt to get around the fact that these schools are signing TV contracts, right? That's letting players sell their name and likeness. But that's different than the NFL, where the NFL partners with its players and the players get a percentage of revenue for the TV deals that come in. What this is going to do, I think, is kind of kill some of those smaller level programs or make like the group of 5 programs have to form their own entity because they are not revenue generating entities, right? Coastal Carolina, that's great that they had a great season last year, but nobody this year is going to go, oh, I'm spending a boatload of money to watch Coastal Carolina on ESPN. Now, maybe those group of 5 form their own sort of entity and then can sell off a TV contract and can pay their players from that space. But let's be honest, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson drive eyeballs a heck of a lot more than Coastal Carolina and Cincinnati and Boise State. And so there's going to be haves and have-nots. And I suspect that this is just going to drive sort of a entity that's 30, 40, 50 teams that just ends up looking more like professional leagues.
Are we headed to a point where we're going to see a player play for 4 different schools in 4 different years? Like, if you want a marketing savvy player, are we going to have a high school kid come out and he's going to play? Nike's going to create a campaign for him. He's going to play at Oregon one year, USC another year, Texas, and then Miami. Really, really spread it out. Try to catch the different markets in the United States. Here, like, are we going to see that in the coming future here, or is it going to get that crazy? Or do you think we're going to take baby steps in that direction?
I mean, I don't think it's going to be quite that crazy. I actually think it's more likely that in NCAA basketball, because you only have to convince maybe 5 or 6 players to actually do it, you just have a team that doesn't come out for the championship game. Say, we're not coming out until you actually pay us, right? Like, we deserve a portion of the revenue that's being generated by this giant tournament that brings in all these dollars. And if the players don't go out and play, then there is no product that the NCAA is selling to CBS and all these other entities. And if there's no product, all of a sudden the NCAA is getting sued because they have not been able to fulfill their contractual obligations because their student athletes or employees or whatever you want to call them haven't come out and haven't actually participated. That to me is a more likely thing. I mean, you think about what happens in the major league sports. you get lockouts and you get strikes, right? When they don't like their deals. And essentially what that is a player, when they go on strike, saying, we're not going to give you the content that enables you to fulfill your contractual obligations. Now, in professional sports, you also see them bringing in replacement players, right? That's been a story all throughout collective bargaining. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm sure there are all sorts of legal ramifications to these sorts of things. The National Labor Relations Board will get involved. You've also got private schools like Notre Dame and Northwestern that are not publicly run operations, which complicates things as well. You know, if you remember, there was the thing a couple of years ago where Northwestern players tried to unionize, and the National Labor Relations Board told them that they couldn't. So there are legal ramifications to all these sorts of things. But I think what's going to happen is that the money is going to get so large that the players are going to have lawyers who advise them. And I don't know that it's going to happen in college football, because you got to get enough players to sort of come together, because it's not just the 22 who are on the field. You'd have to get all the backups and those sorts of guys involved too. I think college basketball, though, might be a little bit easier, where you only have to convince, the starting 5 or maybe even just the 12 guys on the roster to do something that forces the hand of the NCAA. Because let's be honest, if all of a sudden Duke doesn't come out to play the game in the NCAA tournament, it's going to be a giant story, and it's going to be a problem to not have Duke and North Carolina and NC State and, Kentucky and all the big college football programs. If you do it at the right time, you can really put pressure on the NCAA, and that'll sort of make things change.
I know we focus on football with this show here, but with all of this going on and all the chatter about football and these type of sports, basketball, that are the revenue generating sports at most universities, you have a few exceptions here and there on what sports also generate revenue school by school basis. But for the most part, men's basketball and football are your two big revenue producers. Are we going to see I don't want to say, I think that saying the death of non-revenue sports is a bit of an exaggeration, but are we going to see them struggle, do you think? Or are we going to see them be enhanced with maybe more money coming into the coffers overall?
It's an interesting question. I mean, because there was, if you remember earlier this year, Cincinnati, I think, decided to cancel a bunch of their non-revenue generating sports, mainly male sports, in order just in response to the COVID pandemic. And one of the things that happened is they got sued under Title IX, because that sort of made them adjust how they were supporting some of the other sports, and particularly the women's sports that were supported by the university as well. And so it's going to be, I'm not an expert at Title IX law, right? And right. I suspect that Title IX law and compensating players and treating them as professionals, which is essentially what you're doing if you're paying them, are going to be at odds. And how you split off a football program or a basketball program from those other sports legally is going to be the question. Because if you can make them their own separate legal entity that's not run by the university, then they don't owe anything to Title IX. At least that would be my interpretation, right? Like a private company that I work for does not need to then go support a non-revenue generating company just because of some Title IX law. The Title IX law is specifically aimed at public universities. And so what I think they're going to do is, I think they're essentially going to say, all right, yeah, we believe this is a business. We're going to split it off as a business. People are still, we'll lease back the stadium from the university in order to utilize the swamp. But at the end of the day, the Florida Gators will not be a university-driven entity. It's just going to be a minor league. And the money is way too big to allow the Title IX stuff to, quote unquote, screw that up, right? At the end of the day, the dollars are going to flow. And if people still go see Florida play in the swamp, if they still go see Ohio State play in the horseshoe, I'm not sure they're going to care whether the guys are actually going to class or not. I mean, and let's be honest, in some cases, they're not going to class anyway, right? So depending upon the program, depending upon all those different sorts of things, at least at that point, the guys, the shades are up, right? We've said, this is professional. We're going to pay you. You come to work. And in order to work, this gives you an opportunity to get to the NFL, and you're compensated to do that. In many cases, that's a lot of what these major programs are anyway.
Hey, look, I started 2 bits with the hopes of really gaining some understanding. I'm laughing over here because I think I have more questions than answers now. But I mean, you're showing, just all these questions show what a complicated issue this is. And this is going to take, I mean, anything less than a decade to unfold. I mean, this is not something that's right around the corner. I mean, maybe changes are on the way, but in terms of settling in and finding an actual groove, we got some work to do, folks. We got
Lawyers are gonna make a lot of money on this one.
It's gonna be a minute too. It's gonna be a minute. All right, let's move on to 4 bits. Hey, Florida Gators active on the recruiting trail this week, getting commits from Shamar James, a 4-star linebacker out of Mobile, Alabama at Faith Academy, and Chandler Smith, a 3-star wideout of Bishop Moore Catholic in Orlando, Florida. James was highly celebrated on social media this week. He was a target for Alabama. From scouting report from 24/7 Sports says James has a moldable frame with long limbs, an athletic build, a two-way high school player, makes some high school or high-level acrobatic plays as a wide receiver and a wildcat quarterback on offense. So it sounds like he can do a lot there, Will. Pretty athletic guy. Chandler Smith comes in. Decorated track athlete, won the state title in 100 and 200 meter dashes as a junior, while anchoring the 4x100 team that took second at the 2A state track meet. In 2020, he only played 5 games and missed some time due to injury, but it sounds like we got a burner coming in at wideout and a really solid athlete that they beat the Crimson Tide out for on the recruiting trail there. Will, time to celebrate, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's why you get excited about a guy like, like a guy like James, because Alabama clearly wanted him, right? And you sort of pulled him right out of Alabama, right under Saban's nose, and you were able to get him to commit to Florida. That, you mentioned he's a two-way player, played running back, wide receiver, and multiple spots on defense. That's really been one of the things that's been a hallmark of the Florida defense ever since Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham came to town, is having these guys who can do multiple things and allowing them to, switch between safety and linebacker and those sorts of things. And then you look at a guy like Chandler Smith, a high-level 3-star, but they've got him and verified 10.28 in the 100 meters and 21.4 in the 200 meters. So he's really, really fast, right? He's also 6'3", 180. So this is not Brandon James, right? This is somebody who is who's a big target out there, but also a fast target. But there's a reason why he's a 3-star, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with he's really, really fast, but also that he has a lot of development to do. This is what we should expect, right? I mean, Florida only had 6 recruits coming into the weekend, or 6 commits coming into the weekend. Now they're up to 8. I think like 21st in the country when you look at 24/7 Sports. I don't want people to get too high just at bringing in 2 guys. I mean, they've only got 8 commits, which means we've got 17 more to go. And the question is going to be the quality of those 17. And I think Shamar James, really high quality guy, 146th overall, high level 4-star. Chandler Smith, 364th overall, high level 3-star. If they bring in, 16 guys and 8 of them are at James's level and 8 of them are at Smith's level, I think you could be really, really happy with that. But, I try not to get too high or too low with 1 recruit or 2 recruits. What I try to do is take a look holistically at the class. And the truth is Florida is pretty much set up to finish 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere in the country nationally when it comes to recruiting. These guys don't really change that. In fact, the balance of James's ranking and Smith's ranking sort of keeps Florida's ranking right where it's been. And that's kind of what we should expect, because that's exactly where the ranking of the players has been for the last 4 years under Dan Mullen. I don't expect it to get considerably better, but hey, I mean, maybe they start hitting on guys like Walter Nolan. Maybe they start hitting on some of these 5-star guys, bring in 3 or 4 of those guys. All of a sudden that average ranking goes up. You end up in like the 6th or 7th range. And now you're talking about building the talent, because that is a big thing. I mean, as much flack as I give Mullen for his recruiting is consistently better than Jim McElwain's was. So the team should be consistently better than Jim McElwain's were, especially when you consider, I think Mullen's a better coach. So a guy like James, a guy like Smith, those are high quality guys that are added to the roster. I don't want to like poo-poo it. I think it's important to get those guys, but let's be honest, there's a lot more work to be done. There need to be 14, 15, 16 more guys brought in at James level or above, and then you're looking at a top 3 class. But I suspect it's probably going to be somewhere more in the 9th to 11th place, kind of where we've been the last 3 or 4 years.
I can't be the only one checking Twitter regularly for Walter Nolan updates. I can't. I got high hopes on that one, Will. How are we feeling about Walter Nolan?
Well, I mean, he's been wearing Florida stuff to the camps he's been going to, and then you see this first step when he's running drills. And as much as I harp on defensive tackle and defensive line in terms of where Florida needs to get better, that's a big deal, right? Especially if you bring in a guy like that who can play snaps his freshman year. You still got Gravon Dexter in there, another 5-star playing defensive tackle, and next year really ought to be somebody who's who's a star, right? I mean, that's the expectation, is that he's going to step up and be a star next year. And you bring a guy like Nolan in, you got Desmond Watson who came in last year. You figure he's going to be in better shape and be ready to go. And all of a sudden you got the makings of a defensive line that can be dominant. And that is the thing that I think, we talk about DBU, we talk about the defensive backs, we talk about the linebackers and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it starts up front in the SEC. The reason Alabama always has a good defense, and the reason the defense has an opportunity to get better, is the linebackers might be getting out of their gap in the second week or the third week or the fourth week of the season, but the defensive line is still occupying multiple blockers up front, and those linebackers are out of position, and so maybe they don't make the play, but Saban gets them coached up. By the 8th or 9th or 10th game, that's not happening anymore. That's not what happened to Florida's defense last year. What happened to Florida's defense last year is the defensive line got mauled, which meant the linebackers got mauled, which meant the safeties had to come up. And when the safeties came up, then they weren't able to help in pass protection. And there were obviously some limitations on that side. So I'm excited about adding something to the defensive line. Nolan's a big part of that. So certainly hope that Dan Mullen Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham can come through and bring him to Gainesville.
All right, moving on to 6 bits. I know we discussed the expanded college football playoff, but saw a good article from David Wunderlich at Gator Country talking about how the new college football playoff format will and won't change how Dan Mullen is evaluated. And as always, we'll have the link to these articles we reference in the description here on our YouTube channel. Long story short, I mean, he's making the basic argument that Florida with the 12-team field is beneficial in a way for Dan Mullen, assuming the Gators can make that run, right? 12-team format. The Gators would have been in every year since 2018, and that list doesn't even include the Crimson Tide. Now, you and I were looking that up before the show, Will, and we're having a little debate about that. Maybe the Tide were, if they didn't get in 2019 when they lost to LSU and Auburn, they were certainly on the bubble, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to come down to how much does the SEC actually want to blow this playoff up. I mean, you're going to have a lot of people in the room, and you're going to have people who don't want 4 or 5 SEC teams in the championship, or in the tournament. But the reality is almost every year you got 4 or 5 SEC teams in the top 12. It's an achievable goal for Mullen to yearly get in that top 12. The problem is right now finishing 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th doesn't win you anything, right? It wins you a trip to the Capital One Bowl, or it wins you a trip to the Peach Bowl, and maybe you get to beat Michigan, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything other than you finish, in the top 10 and you say, hey, great job. You pat people on the back and then you go forward. But it doesn't give you a shot at winning the championship. I think the interesting part of Wunderlich's article is the point that if you really think that you've got an advantage in the coaching realm, then if you make that 12, right, you have the ability to then overcome some of your recruiting deficiencies. I think is sort of, I'm not sure that he said it that way, but that to me is sort of the point, is that if you think Dan Mullen has an advantage as a coach, and you think he can game plan, and you think he can get the team ready for teams that are more talented, and I do think there's evidence that Mullen is able to do that, then you get to a point where, okay, maybe you're the 12th team in, but hey, can you pull an upset? Can you pull another upset? And all of a sudden, are you in the Final Four? And, let's be honest, if Florida loses in the Final Four after they've earned their way in by winning a couple of playoff games, that probably changes the perception of the last couple of years versus just finishing 5th or 6th or 7th after beating Michigan in a bowl game that nobody really cares about, right? And that was the thing in 2018. Half of Michigan's defense had already opted out by the time they played that game. So, we talk about the Cotton Bowl last year and Oklahoma beating Florida and Florida not really caring, but it's not as though that's a new phenomenon, right? I mean, that's been happening for years, and this is going to hopefully prevent that.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make. I thought with the BCS, when you had strictly the BCS system, it still meant something to make a BCS bowl game. That was still a big event to make the Sugar Bowl, say. Now with the playoff era here, it's not the same feel. In too many years, we're seeing not just the Adrian Peterson, Christian McCaffrey, or not Adrian Peterson. I'm sorry, who was one of the first? Fournette. Fournette was one of the first big opt-outs. These guys were maybe 1 or 2 guys would opt out. Now you're seeing about 4 or 5 guys opt out on a roster, and it's significantly impacting these bowl games. I'll tell you, the last couple of years, I haven't even done bowl picks because I just have no idea what team, or if I do it in 5 minutes because I have no idea what team is showing up on any of these games. It's just completely unpredictable game to game. But I feel like if you have the one positive of the expanded playoff here, you get a guy like Mullen on your sideline with as we have in Florida here, And if he gets into the tournament, they use that phrase all the time in the NFL, just get into the tournament. If he gets into the tournament, he's going to be a dangerous guy. I mean, you're not going to want to see him coming up to Ann Arbor or Columbus, or you don't want to see that. So I think that's interesting, especially in a conference. I think if anything, it gives you more hope as when you're buried in a conference with the likes of Alabama right now. And you look at LSU and almost it feels like a once in a generation type of team that they had in 2019. Good luck building back to that and having that on a regular basis. I mean, the machine that Saban has built at Alabama, to expect to win conference titles right now is a pretty lofty expectation. You obviously still do as a Florida football fan, but you know that you're going to have to really bring it year to year. And maybe you might pick one off here or there, but it's tough. Like the expectation right now that you're going to be beating Alabama every single year is pretty nuts right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess though that's kind of my point, and the reason that I'd argue against a 12-team playoff is if you can't beat Alabama in the SEC championship game,
Right.
why are you going to beat them when it comes to the playoff, right? And so that I think maybe is the argument that would be used to keep a team like Alabama in 2019 out, is LSU already beat them. LSU was on its way to being a really special team. They just absolutely torched Clemson and were on a roll by the end of the year. And if you can't beat LSU in the regular season in Tuscaloosa, why do you deserve another shot at LSU in the playoff? And in that respects, then I do think bringing in teams like Coastal Carolina and Cincinnati and all these other guys who claim UCF, who claim they want a shot. The problem is they're going to get beat by 50 by LSU too. Like you haven't really shown a whole lot of differentiation there. The thing that concerns me about the playoff, and this is the other thing that I think Wunderlich did a really nice job of, or at least brought the question to my attention, was, you know, we think about Mike White, right? He makes the tournament every year, and that's like the lead defense as to why he should keep his job by people who defend Mike White. Now, you know, whatever. I'm not a basketball person when it comes to Florida basketball. I have my opinions on that, but at the end of the day, I think I wrote an article earlier this year that basically said that's a stupid way of actually evaluating a coach. And the reason is that half of the teams in the NCAA in the Power 5 conferences make the NCAA tournament. So using the NCAA tournament as a gauge for how well a coach has done, really, I mean, you know, at no point in the last 3 or 4 years have we ever really thought Florida had a shot at winning the national title, right? They got to the Elite Eight on the Chiozza sort of prayer against Wisconsin. But after that, there really hasn't been any team that you said, yeah, that team has a shot at winning the title. I mean, maybe you kind of hoped that they might be able to make a deep run, especially this year, but you know, you just don't think that. And I think that's going to be the problem is if you get a team that finishes 10th, 11th, or 12th, you're going to have people go, well, we made the tournament. Well, we made the tournament. It's like, yeah, but you had no prayer of actually winning the game. And so that'll be the question is if a coach is getting into the tournament repeatedly, but then is losing in the first round, is that held against him? I mean, and we are going to get to find out who some of the frauds are, because Notre Dame's going to make the tournament every year and they're going to get smashed every year. And we're going to be able to go, okay, yeah, it's just like when we used to put them in bowl games they didn't deserve, and then they get beat by 30. So I think there's some positive and some negatives to it. I mean, it's coming, so it doesn't really matter, right? The only thing that I want to caution people on is that I don't think it's a good gauge of coaching performance. I think you see a coach who makes a run to the Final Four in football, it'll be like, okay, his team got hot. He was able to game plan. That's fine. Now, if Mullen shows that he can go in as the 11th or 12th seed and make it to the Final Four all the time, then I think that's sort of a feather in his cap. I'm just not sure that's going to be something that we're going to see. I think at some point, talent evens things out. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Mullen has a terrible record against Georgia, LSU, and Alabama and Auburn when he was at Mississippi State, is it turns out that when you have better players, it becomes, or when you have players who aren't as good, it becomes more difficult to beat those big guys. And Florida should always be up there. Florida should always be competitive. But, you know, I think one of the things that gets me is that people look at the recruiting and go, well, it's pretty good. And I'm like, yeah, but it's 5th or 6th in the SEC. In what other walk of life is 5th or 6th in the SEC acceptable? And we're about to find out if that's true. If 4th or 5th in the SEC gets you into the playoff, then there's going to be a subset of people who say that's acceptable. And the reality is that's not the Gator standard, right? The Gator standard is SEC championships. It's
Right.
national championships. It's not finishing 11th and making a tournament.
If an 11 seed delivers a national title, is that the Gator standard?
You know, that's an interesting question. I think so.
Let me ask one more. I'll let you think on that for a sec while I throw one more your way too. The SEC championship game in general. if you're 2-loss Florida and you beat Georgia, and Georgia also has 2 losses, but they're staying home because you won the East, aren't you more at risk by going to Atlanta to play to Alabama than Georgia would be sitting at home? I mean, we've seen this exact example with Alabama making the playoff in, what was it, 2017, when Auburn beat them, and Georgia and Alabama met ultimately in the national title game where Alabama beat them on that last minute prayer by Tua. But I think that it's going to be interesting. There might be they'll never get rid of the SEC championship game with the financial impact, but are you going to see a scenario where you lose the SEC title game, you go home, and then the team you beat that didn't make the game is in the playoffs instead of you?
Yeah. Or what if you're 13-1 or 13-0 going to the SEC, or 12-0 going to the SEC championship game, and the team that's coming in is 11-1, and if they lose, they might get left out of the playoff? Do you just lay down and play your backups? That way you can have 2 SEC teams go and make more money. I mean, there's all these weird incentive structures that get messed up because each of the conferences is separate, but then are coming together to form this playoff. I mean, you see this in the NBA all the time, right? I mean, the Clippers recently were throwing games to the end of the year because they wanted to end up not in the Lakers side of the bracket, which was hilarious then when the Lakers lost, because then the Clippers were on the wrong side of the bracket at that point. But my point is that you in any system you have incentives. The 4-team playoff incentivizes you to win no matter what, because at the end of the day, one slip up might prevent you from getting in there. Once you expand it to 12, that incentive structure changes a little bit. And I'm actually going to be really curious to see what the committee does in terms, I'm assuming they'll use a committee, what the committee does in terms of assigning these things. Like, because can you imagine what'll happen if they try to prevent conferences from playing one another? And so they put SEC teams in each of sort of the 4 pods of the bracket. There's going to be 1 or 2 years where you got 4 SEC teams in the final 4. And boy, will the gnashing of teeth be awesome at that point when you got, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU in the final 4 of the tournament. And you're just like, it's the SEC Invitational here at the end. And I mean, it'll be fun, but I don't know that it's necessarily good for college football. I think at some point that'll cause problems. Maybe they'll put the salary cap in, like I suggested on the recruiting.
Well, it's simple. You just got to expand it to 32 then. Just keep expanding it until it's not 4 SEC teams.
We'll have 12 SEC teams in the final, or 16. There's only 14 SEC teams, so they'll have 8 in the final 8 at some point.
More SEC, keep expanding. Got it.
I mean, that's the funny part, right? Is the expansion to 4 teams was justified based on that LSU versus Alabama national championship a few years ago, where AJ McCarron played like the best game of his life and was able to take on the Honey Badger and bring that championship home. And that one felt a little bit cheap because LSU had already beaten Alabama earlier in the year, and then Alabama comes back and wins one. Florida had that back in '96, right, where Florida State beat them earlier in the year, 2 weeks prior, or 2 games prior, and then Florida comes back and beats them in the Sugar Bowl for the national title. So those sorts of things have happened in college football, but it's relatively rare. I don't know if it's going to be as rare anymore now if this gets expanded.
That was a different deal, though, in '96, because you still had the Rose Bowl had the tie-in, and Arizona State was number 2. And Ohio State was number 4. So the Big Ten and Pac-10 were required to go to the Rose Bowl, and it's more kind of a lucky draw for Florida.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's any better either. So, at the end of the day, it's I'm going to watch it. We're all going to watch it, right? Anybody who's watching this program is going to watch it. So, we'll have fun with whatever they put out there. But, like you mentioned, I mean, we talked about the Supreme Court. We talked about the NIL. Now we're talking about a new playoff format. Things are changing, and they're changing fast. Yeah. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Dan Mullen and how Florida decide to adapt to make sure that they can maintain their blue blood status. Because the reality is just walking into somebody's room and saying, I'm the head coach at Oklahoma isn't going to get that recruit in your door anymore. It's going to be, hey, I'm the head coach for Oklahoma. Here's the car dealership we'll introduce you to where you can do commercials. Here's the educational stuff we'll give you in terms of, stipends and that sort of stuff. And, oh, by the way, here's a contract we're going to have you sign, a 4-year deal for however many thousands of dollars for coming to play for a university. I mean, that's really where we're headed. And, it's going to be interesting to see, 20 years from now, we'll look back. I mean, that's the funny thing is you look back 20 years, in 2001 at what college football was and what it is now. It's a very, very different animal, right? And so, you look in 2041, what's college football going to look like? It's going to be a very different animal. I don't know whether that's good or bad. It's just going to be different, and that's sort of where we're headed.
I can only imagine how talented the Oklahoma Sooners football team is going to be when they start paying players well. I can only imagine. All right, let's move on to
Allegedly.
let's move on to
Allegedly.
let's move on to a dollar. We wanted to do a Father's Day message here. We end up talked about a lot of subjects where I felt like we almost had as many questions as we did answers on these subjects this week, but do a simple Father's Day message here. We'll start with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, happy Father's Day to everybody out there. I have 4 kids, so certainly Father's Day means something for me, but I'm also one of 4 kids. And so, one of the things my dad and I do every year, or at least try to do every year, is go down, I live up in Philadelphia. They live down in Florida. So I go down for a football game, me, my brother, my dad, and usually like a niece or a nephew or one of my kids goes to that game. And that's always a big sort of, one of the things about Florida football is it's a big family thing, right? And it gets everybody together. And so this year it's looking like it might be Thanksgiving, which is the Florida State game, which is always sort of fun to go there and see Florida, especially these days now that Florida's beating the Seminoles all the time. So, Florida football has been really a connection point. When Dad, when I moved away and Dad sort of moved to Gainesville, it was a place where we could get together and make sure that we spent time as a family. So it's always been a big deal. And it's funny. One of my favorite games is the Treon Harris Florida State game. What was it, like 29-2 or something like that? And it was an awful game for Florida, but it's my favorite game because I went with my daughter, right? And if you look on my Twitter handle, I've got a picture of her hugging me. She was excited about the cheerleaders. She sent me on a tour to try to find cotton candy. That was all she wanted. And the swamp was out. I can't believe they were out of cotton candy, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I missed the whole third quarter because I was walking around looking for cotton candy and got back and she was disappointed. So I had to go get her something else. But, again, the point being that there's a familial thing. It's my dad, it's my daughter, it's me, it's my brother, all at the swamp enjoying the Gators and sort of teaching them young that to grow up and love this stuff in a way that we love it now. So, just Father's Day sort of a reminder that you don't, especially with COVID going on over the last year, not being able to get down for a game. And Father's Day is just a reminder that not everyone has a father who's still around. Not everyone has a father who's a positive influence in their life. So really thankful that I have that in my life and thankful that hopefully I'm that for my kids as well.
Hey, well, first off, happy Father's Day to you, Will. 4 kids, man. That's a lot of work. I would have expected you to have multiple charts about where the cotton candy was sold, like what's the output per quarter. I would have expected a little preparation ahead of time on the cotton candy there, Will. But it was a rough day for Gator Nation in general on that day. So you didn't miss much that third quarter. I can promise you, you didn't miss much.
You don't get to be as svelte as I am without being able to substitute something for the cotton candy that's just as bad for you. So that's really the issue. Is I'm more of a ooh, there's something over here that's bad for me, I will eat it. And my daughter was just sort of locked in on the cotton candy. So no matter what other crap I brought her way, that wasn't going to make her happy.
Well, I want to give a quick shout out to my dad as well, and both my mom and dad, big supporters of this. They watch everything we do, and just want to say hi, mom, hi, dad, and happy Father's Day to everybody out there. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Stand Up and Holler. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. Go Gators!
Go Gators!
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators! Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.